Welcome back to another episode of Drunk Bible Study, the bonus. So here we are, doing bonus stuff, and I wanted to talk real quick about Balaam because I was super surprised, and I had actually talked a little bit about him in a previous bonus episode, but I was super surprised that he died in this one, and I was like, wait a minute, nah, I don't think that he's gonna die yet, but I guess he did, and I had a couple more things to learn about him, so let's get into it. First of all, something that I didn't realize is that apparently Balaam came from a long line of celebrated diviners, so his family had made their living for several generations cursing or blessing people. So cursing or blessing. So
they're
apparently
in the cursing and blessing business.
Correct.
The wheeling and dealing.
Yeah, this is from BibleTools.org, by the way. So it was their family trade. They passed it down, giving their sons names that went along with it. Names like Burning and Devourer. So, okay, their family reputation had traveled throughout the entire region. So if anyone wanted someone cursed, they would send for a baru from Balaam's family, since they would be
a what?
A baru. B-A-R-U. B-A-R-U.
Baru? What is a baru?
Apparently it's someone who's the best in the world at cursing people. These baru, regardless of the requester's religion or political stripe, would, for a price, perform their auguries. It's like an auguries. Say their
some spell casting.
Yeah, say their incantations, make their sacrifices to some particular god, and then curse the other party in the name of that god. So this is what King Balak of Moab was doing. He was sending for the most renowned curser in the known world, Balaam, to come and curse Israel. Which,
so this was like a job.
I didn't get this from just reading the Bible, so this is good background information, faux show.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like he sent for this guy not because he knew of Balaam specifically necessarily.
Well, he was
just like, I need the good cursor. Who's
the baru?
Who's the good cursing
Who's
guy?
the best cursor, apparently. So, yeah. So Balak had heard about all the things that God had done for Israel, so he needed the very best to go up against the God who could part the Red Sea and rain manna from heaven every day for 38 years. This God could bring 10 plagues upon the people of Egypt and find water in the desert for 2.5 or 3 million people. So King Balak, needing the very best, was willing to give up just about all of his wealth to Balaam, who he felt could do the job of cursing Israel.
Can I point out a funny thing?
Yes.
So that thing you just read talked about raining manna from heaven, right?
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, yeah.
Now, from what we remember from what we read, did the manna ever rain? Was it ever described as falling?
It was never.
I don't recall that.
Right?
You collected it from the ground. It was like the dew.
It showed up after the dew in the morning,
yes.
Right? Okay, so growing up, it was always described as raining from heaven.
Oh.
Or even the expression manna from heaven has this image of it falling down. And to me, anytime I read a biblical article now, either about Job or about things like that, where it talks about raining down from heaven, I'm like, I'm not sure you've actually read this thing or really thought about it when you did, you know?
Yeah.
It's just, it's funny how I never would have questioned it before. I've been like, yeah, that's the story, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's now that we're reading it and also kind of being critical as we go.
It's not quite the story.
Yeah, that's not the story. And it's this hang on now. The fact that you said that makes me think that maybe you don't know the story.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. So, okay, I wanted to dive deeper into the reasoning why they would kill him. And I guess apparently still later on in the Bible, as far as into Revelations, they're going to friggin' talk about Balaam. So
I read that in my research too.
Yeah.
Wait, what were...
Basically, what I ran into my research is that the reason why Balaam was killed is because apparently, even though he was going to curse the Israelites, but then couldn't, ended up blessing them, the story, which was not written down in Numbers,
exactly,
is apparently referenced in Revelations instead. So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later,
right?
Sam Yahoo makes this assumption that no, what happened is Balaam went back and then was like, oh, Balak, this is how you'll actually defeat the Israelites, is if you send your women to go seduce them.
See, yeah, exactly. That he was the one who was like the cause for the sexual problems. Not problems, that sounds wrong, but like
the plague that happened after there was the spearing through the genitals and right?
Well, the spear through the genitals ended the plague.
Yes.
So
sure?
he was responsible. He was responsible for like essentially putting into the minds of the people that like you should do this thing in order to get at the Israelites, I believe.
Supposedly.
Yeah.
According to a book that's written many years later.
Yeah, like the end of the story. So, okay, can I just like say two more things? So there's a section in simplybible.com about what Balaam did right and then what Balaam did wrong. So, okay, what he did right was that he refused to make any pronouncement other than what God says. Even though the king pressed Balaam for another message, Balaam would give him none but God's. The king wanted to curse upon the Israelites, but Balaam gave them a blessing. So, like, over and over, the leaders of Moab asked Balaam to have another go at divining the message they wanted, and each time the Lord gave Balaam a stronger version of the truth and told him to pronounce a blessing instead of a curse. So Balaam repeated the blessing, faithfully defying the king. His attitude was, I must be careful to speak what the Lord puts in my mouth. Numbers 23:12. Something along those lines. Yeah. However, what he did wrong, he was apparently an unfaithful prophet, which, like, I never got from the story, but, like, okay, whatever you say, simplybible.com. So, Balaam, by the powers granted him by God, had the opportunity to demonstrate the power of the true God against the deception of false gods and idols. So, when Balaam pronounced a blessing or a curse, it worked. Balak said as much when he summoned Balaam to curse the Israelites. And then, this says Balaam was in Numbers 31:8-16. And I'm like, are you sure? This says Balaam was too easily led away from God's truth into error. And he in turn led many others astray.
Well, but based
that's
on
not there
what?
in the story.
I know.
Yeah.
And it says it was his counsel that caused the children of Israel to sin and to suffer a terrible plague.
But
I'm like,
who?
And then there's a bunch of other stuff that we're not
Revelation.
Off of what we learn in Revelation.
Well, and apparently in Peter 2:15, which is again not even close to where we are currently, that he loved money more than the truth. Spoiler alert, but we won't remember in like 7 years when we read that. So, and then it also says that he presumed to manipulate God. So it says, sure, Balaam uttered a blessing instead of a curse, but only because God gave him no option. What would be the point in Balaam pronouncing a curse if God was going to give a blessing? Balaam would look stupid and damage his reputation. However, Balaam kept going along with Balak's repeated attempts to get a curse from God upon the Israelites because, like Balak, he hoped that maybe somehow God could be pressured into doing a backflip.
But
that's funny because I read that totally different. To me, it's more
agree.
like,
he was like, look, I can't do anything about it, man. Like, this is God we're talking about here.
And then the king's like, no, but really. And he's like, all right, if you want to give me more stuff to sacrifice and more money, I'll try again. But like, this is the deal.
But,
and he's like, as a businessman, he's like, sure, man, if you want to keep paying me
but
for
that's
this.
why God's angry. That's why God's angry.
Okay, so it's the idea that like Balaam was kind of playing both sides of the fence.
I see.
Is that why?
I guess that's why God got pissed off, which of course, like, any little thing is going to piss off God. But he said, God, however, refused to listen, and he was angry with Balaam for not rejecting Balak's proposal outright from the very first.
That just seems like a lot of speculation on the part of whoever's writing this.
I think it was, but they have to give like some reason for, They said that he was judged worthy of death with the donkey, and I'm like, well, okay.
What?
I know, it's
meaning
stupid.
the fact that the angel said that he was going to kill him?
Right.
Yeah.
But for his donkey, Balaam would have been killed by the angel of the Lord. And God provided a savior for Balaam. Balaam's donkey was Balaam's suffering savior. God was long-suffering to Balaam. God was showing patience with Balaam's pandering to Balak's 3 attempts to change God's word by changing mountaintops. And then apparently God punished Balaam's hearers with death. God killed those who heeded Balaam's wicked counsel, which is super random. And I'm like,
we can't just freaking admit The Israelites had no idea who Balaam was.
And he just happened to get killed.
He happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. They killed him. Maybe realized after the fact, like, oh, maybe this was one of our guys. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they read some like scrolls left behind and were like, oh, this guy was cool.
Into Yahweh. Like, can't admit a freaking mistake.
So anyways, yeah, I learned a lot, but I also didn't learn much because I don't think that any of that was written. I think it was, as you said, all speculative. So here we are.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Boy.
Yeah.
What do you got for us?
Well, I want to talk about these virgin women who seem to be a real problem.
Well, the virgin ones are all right.
Well, okay, I mean...
Unless you mean an ethical problem, then yes.
An ethical problem and kind of a meta sense, because what I learned from Googling specifically this verse, Numbers 31, 17, and 18, is that this is a really common verse that atheists whip out in debate of... Because think about it, it's a very dense couple verses of the odds like... You gotta kill all these people, keep these virgin women to be sex slaves.
I mean, Moses said it, but
you get what I mean.
Supposedly speaking for Yahweh.
God said it apparently through Moses. I'm assuming.
But it's a pretty dense verse to whip out as far as like, how do you square this? How do you justify that this is in the Bible? And
that makes sense. I mean,
I actually found like a Catholic forum post that was like a thread that was literally basically like, all right, you guys, what are we going to do about this verse?
Wait, really? That's amazing.
Yes, really.
Do we release a new Bible and we just strike this one? Like, what
do we say here? Like, how do we make this for us?
How do we talk about this? And so this was kind of a recurring theme across many, 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 many different outlets and blogs and forums and stuff like that of people being like, how do we justify this verse?
Yeah.
What do we say to people who whip this thing out? And such a colorful cornucopia of justifications. I mean, ranging from things that I think are quite reasonable, things on the spectrum of like, yeah, that was kind of like what everybody did back then, and it sucks. It's another evidence of like the ancient Israelites also being a sinful people and having to suffer consequences for that, you know? But it's like, yeah, that sucks, which I think is a pretty reasonable take on it. Versus pretty much every possible flavor you can think of justifying it and saying that it's okay. Everything from... There's an interesting theory that they think that part of the plague that was caused by the Midianite women sleeping with the Israelites was actually a massive STI plague.
Okay.
And they make this justification of like, well, if you kill everyone and you kill all the women who are sexually active, then
what?
Then
you stop the spread of...
then you're an ancient people and you don't know how STIs work, and so that's how you fix it.
I think that's a stretch right there.
Yeah,
I really do.
Okay, there are other theories.
But it's one, though, that like 100% anyone who was raised in the kind of like sex is bad and you will die mentality is like, oh yeah,
Totes.
Okay, now it's okay. Killing them all is fine. Killing all of these girls and women is fine.
Yeah. There's another justification of like, no, not sex slaves. Not sex slaves. No. Israelites don't do that. Not sex slaves. They would have just been normal slaves.
I read that too, actually. I was looking up something entirely different, but it mentioned that. They would have done like
just
weaving and stuff.
Well,
yeah, sure, okay.
Just some weaving slaves.
Yeah, come on. Like, come on.
Well, no. Okay, the argument that was made was like, think about it. There's all these rules for Israelite women that like when they're giving birth or when they're on their periods, they regularly out of commission. So you need some slaves to come in
fill in the gap.
Wow.
Take over all the cooking and the cleaning and the weaving.
Wow.
Which I guess, I don't know. There's another... so I guess we will get to this more in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, there's more specific laws about how you are supposed to treat women that you've captured. And how you are supposed to treat women that you've captured that you also want to marry. Which...
that whole chestnut,
well,
of course.
You know, it's very specific here.
Suggests that maybe it was not the worst, that as we'll get to in Deuteronomy, that like maybe that supposedly the laws were, and again, we don't know if these laws were in place at this time or if this came at a later time, but this idea that like if you do have a slave from another tribe that you want to marry, it's like you need to give her a month to mourn, and you need to do all these things for her, and you need to like marry her and not rape her and stuff like that. So maybe those laws are in place now. Maybe not. I don't know. Other people were saying like, yeah, they probably, these women would have been married off into the Israelites, but once they matured, not at the age of being tender young girls, obviously. Once they matured, they would have married. And then other people...
I'm not holding my breath.
Then there was another post from someone who totally missed the point, who was basically just like, the question was about like, how do we square this verse? Right. And this person was like, it's totally okay for them to marry children.
Wow.
Like,
what?
Like, look at all this evidence. There's, Mary was 14, and then Rebecca, Isaac's wife, was only 10 when she was married off. And this person also put in some kind of creepy stuff about... Yeah, we'll get to that. This person also put in some kind of creepy stuff about like, we don't observe that today. But I don't know. I was pretty sure this person was a pedophile. But
wow. Yikes.
So just as you can expect with a lot of things, there's a lot of scrambling to figure out how do we square this.
Something that kind of that brought up for me, and I think this is so hard because I guess it's, at least in my trying to look stuff up, it's difficult to find a solid, like, reliable context of like what was going on in this part of the world. It's like, it's possible, it's entirely possible that Yahweh and the Israelites, the fact that there's every now and then a little verse about like having to treat the foreigner in your lands equally to every now and then, although there's also a lot of enslaving other people.
Yeah.
It's very possible that relative to what was going on, that was super progressive.
Yes.
And it was actually like, if you were going to be a slave anywhere, this is the place to be a slave.
It's quite possible. Yes, it's possible. Quite possible.
Or it's possible they were the worst.
Yeah.
And they were so much worse than Egypt was and worse than the Canaanites. And we just don't know.
Yeah, it is hard to do that comparative analysis.
And it's hard. It's especially hard because this isn't a history book. It's a religion book.
Yeah.
And so the
it's
articles
super
about
biased.
it. Yeah, the articles about it
are biased.
Have to either justify it or vilify it. It's hard to find someone who's just like, let's try to understand the history here.
Well, I'm sure if we were better at Googling, maybe we could find someone's like thesis paper on that. I just wish that there was more, I suppose, contemporary Christian thought that could just be like, yeah, it was a strictly patriarchal society. And so that's what happens is you value the virgin women as a commodity and you kill everyone else who are your enemies. Like, that's what happens, and that sucks. It's good we don't do that now, at least in our culture, but
I appreciate that you said it like that. Yeah.
I just wish that there was more of that.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of, like, I guess something that's kind of interesting about evangelical Christianity, at least, like the people, like the defending inerrancy type people, right? Who are like, the Bible is it. There's been no more word from God since then. We've got to figure out how to square this. That compared to a lot of other religions, like Catholicism even, where it's like there's still a person who today can go, hey, you know what? Actually, God now thinks this.
Right.
Right?
I mean, the
software update.
Meaning the Pope, yeah. Or Mormonism, where it's like there is a head of that church who still gets updates.
Yeah, where they can be like, because they officially... what was it, in the 90s or maybe the late 2000s, were officially like, no, we're not into that polygamy thing anymore. Like officially. Does
God like download it into their brains and then they tell everyone?
I don't know how God communicates to them. I'm not an expert on Mormonism, so I don't know. However, as much as I still think there are some issues that come up with a lot of religions just in general, Mormons included, I do think it's interesting, though, that there's at least a mechanism for it changing as people realize, like, hey, actually, black people could go to heaven too. Let's update that. And they did. And that changed, right? Like, that was actually a part of their religion that then changed. Or like...
Thank goodness.
I read the Dianetics book, which is like the first book that led to Scientology later on. And there was a part about it talking about like homosexuality coming from engrams, like that those meant there was like problematic parts of your brain that needed to be fixed. And I brought this up to a Scientology person in LA when I walked in and they were talking to me about Scientology. I was like, hey, so I read this thing that troubled me. And their answer was like, I don't remember that. And I've also read that book. I think maybe that's been taken out of more recent versions. And it's like, in a way, I'm like, well, Yeah, so kind of like when I was joking about them being like, what if we just strike this verse? What if we just
But you actually mean that. Yeah.
What if? I don't know. It's just interesting. It's a different way to do a religion than one where you kind of focus on this, like, this has to be it.
Yeah, well, I guess it brings up this question of like, you feel the pressure to square it at all. Because you put that pressure on it.
You can't just be like, yeah, that sucked.
Yeah, we can't just be like, yeah, that sucked. And we don't really use that as an example to dictate our daily lives now in 2019. But no, you feel like you have to prove that it's inerrant and it's good and it's right.
That it's good. I think that's it. It's like that you have to somehow make it good.
Mm-hmm.
It can't just be...
It's unfortunate, though. Can't we just say, like, those were the times, they were wrong, we've upgraded since then, let's do this now. You know?
Right,
things are different now.
It's weird. It is weird.
I mean, there is some of that in some of these evangelical blogs where they do sometimes a really common, I think, justification or common response is to come around and be like, yeah, but Jesus came along and now we don't have to worry about these kind of things. Like that Jesus was kind of the shaking the Etch-a-Sketch, which sometimes makes sense. Sometimes I think is a cop-out answer, but
it's also this just like, hey, let's just throw all the Jews under the bus.
That's true.
And say like,
that's true.
We're okay. We'll still use stuff from this when we want to.
We'll still appropriate from you when it works for us.
When it works for us, yeah. It is rough. But it's
So, Jace, what did you find?
So I tried to look up stuff about those numbers, about the numbers of people and stuff like that. The numbers of numbers, and there's lots of stuff we found before on like the census numbers and like. Are these accurate? Is there maybe a different way to interpret it? But as far as these other numbers of like the cattle and also the slaves, there's not. There's nothing,
no one else is.
No one's talking about it.
Really?
What's interesting though is that something I realized kind of looking into it, just from what we read, is the whole thing about like, well, 1/500th of the ones for the soldiers are going to go to burnt offerings or to Yahweh, and 1/50th. When you look at those numbers, like they work out. Like there was 16,000 people, 16,000 people who went to the soldiers, and of those 32 went to Yahweh. And it's like, yeah, that's 1/500th of 16,000.
Yeah.
So it's like many levels of these numbers would have to be wrong in order for all of this to be wrong. So I don't know. I didn't find anything. I didn't find anything great.
So maybe they really were managing like a football stadium full of virgin women?
Maybe they were. Yeah.
That's a lot, though.
But if
also on some of these, this meant that after they'd killed all of the fighting men, and then they brought everyone back, that there were still, so there were 32,000 left after they killed them. Meaning they killed something like 60,000. That's what I was just going to say.
That they killed even more people.
Boys and women.
Where would you put those bodies?
That's a great question. They just had a humongous bonfire afterwards.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. So then in looking into this, that they killed this just massive number of boys and women. On top of that, something that I had forgotten entirely is that Moses' wife is a Midianite.
Yeah, that sucks.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah. Ooh. So Moses, remember when Moses left Egypt before he came back and saved everyone, when he was out there and there's that scene in the 10 Commandments where all the women are like swooning over him?
Mm-hmm.
He was in Midian. That was in Midian. Mm-hmm. And he ends up marrying Zipporah, who's his wife, who's from Midian. She's a Midianite woman.
You think she's still alive at this point?
I don't know. It's never been mentioned that she died.
It is really awkward, though.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's super awkward. I mean, there's a lot of... See, Moses, like, does he have he never, like, questions? Well, he did used to, but now I guess at this point he's like, well, God told me I'm going to die soon, so whatever, I don't care, I'll just do these last things for him.
Yeah, I don't know. Another article I found also mentioned the fact that after they kill all of these boys and non-virgin women, that Moses orders them to stay outside and, like, cleanse themselves for 7 days. Yeah. And the fact that in all their other battles, that's never been a thing they've had to do. Kind of saying, like, this person at least is saying, like, I think Moses knew he was doing something shitty.
Awkward.
Like,
Really?
he knew that
That's
this was a bad
fascinating.
thing he was doing, that he was just slaughtering these people, and this wasn't justified, and so therefore you had to stay outside the city.
That's really sad.
After doing it. It's awful, yeah. Anyway, the fact that his wife was a Midianite, though, I was like, I'd completely forgotten.
Yeah,
because the names of all these places run
really
together.
Awkward.
Uh-huh.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Well.
Okay, so what have we learned? In conclusion, all of that together, just times were very different.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily need to put pressure on ourselves to make it good, because it's not necessarily good. You know, all this like warfare and torture and rape and pillage, like not really objectively good things for human beings.
And I think that's okay.
But this is a time probably with a very different morality and very different things motivating a people to survive.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to see where we've come from in a lot of ways, like to see kind of like how our society, like what we've taken from all that, and like see how we live now, and you know, where how much we still have to learn and get better at, I think, as well. And
well, again,
a lot of it comes
callback.
from this. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do another callback to the book Ishmael, where he kind of makes the argument in that book, kind of like JC were saying, that it's like it's hard to have a basis of comparison of like, is this really terrible or is this way better than what other people doing? In Ishmael, the author, he lands more on the side of like, this ain't normal. You know, this is like a weird anomaly that this became the dominant culture and the dominant practice that took over and has now influenced even our culture today.
Totally.
He makes his argument like, this ain't normal. This is weird. Whether or not he's enough of an expert to make that call, I don't know. But that's just another way that you could look at it.
Fascinating to think about.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, we all learned a lot. And
as always.
Yeah, they let kids read this book.
Yeah, they encourage it, actually, from what I've heard.
That's
Unsupervised.
Yeah.
really interesting. I can't imagine being a young theologian and, you know, reading this cover to cover because you want to impress mom and dad and God, maybe. And, you know, and coming across things like this and being like, hey, I have a question.
Yeah.
You know, or maybe y'all just didn't read it cover to cover because
Definitely didn't.
You didn't have to.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, I guess you're right. You wouldn't read this a second time, but
no. Probably
anyways, we're excited to get back into Deuteronomy. Not there yet. No, get back into Numbers next week. And wow, we're only two episodes left, so we can't wait to share both of them with you. I'm sure Moses is going to get up to some more shenanigans and the people of Israel. So we'll see you then.